All right, Pat, we got a big one today. Our second penultimate episode that we're covering over the course of this show. And this is also probably one of the biggest episodes of the show just in general. Its first major full-length episode, action battle set piece with Blackwater. This is the second of 4 episodes officially written by George R.R. Martin, and this was a momentous episode to say the least. What are your thoughts going in?
Hey, Dom, I think the Talkin TV family will agree to me that there's no jokes here. This is a banger of an episode, and we're about to get into it.
Absolutely. All of that and more. Stay tuned. Oh, man, I'm getting chills just from that intro. Welcome back, people. Episode 19, Season 2, Episode 9, our second penultimate episode. We are talking about none other than the Battle of Blackwater today. Now, you guys might ask, how are they going to cover it? They don't have like infinite 18 different storylines to cover. So we're going to cover this episode a little bit differently today. We're going to start it off. We're going to talk about kind of like the overall impact of this episode that we had going forward. A lot of stuff going into this episode. Obviously, this is a big action set piece that we have to talk about. And then the second half of the episode, we're just going to break down again all the major beats that happen throughout it. So this is an episode that was directed by director Neil Marshall, who was kind of their action go-to guy for the first 2 major battle action piece episodes. He obviously would also direct the Battle of the Wall, the Watchers on the Wall episode, the penultimate episode for season 4 later on, before he kind of got replaced by Miguel Sapochnik as the resident go-to, big action set piece director. And as far as this early on in the show's run, this is kind of unmarked territory for them. Obviously we'd had like battles as backgrounds, and then we had like characters getting knocked out right before the battle happened. How convenient in order to kind of hide their low budget. But this was the first time. Obviously, the Battle of Blackwater was a tremendous event from the books, obviously being the thing that ended, book 2, obviously, which this season is based on, A Clash of Kings. And so this was going to be a tremendous thing. And so I remember going in right after, some of those early reactions back in the day, going in and wondering like, wow, this is like a pretty intense, pretty intrinsic, very detail-oriented battle. Like, how are they going to pull this off? And I think by all intents and purposes, way back in 2012, they nailed it. And it was a momentous episode, and it kind of, in a way, was another one of those episodes that kind of like changed television forever. So Pat, what were your thoughts going in? Like, what do you remember about this episode from watching it back in the day?
Absolutely nothing. No.
So pretty much par for the course, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm just being contrarian here, but no. This episode was basically, it's everything comes together. You're wondering where the big battle sequences are in the first, 2 seasons up to this point, and here it is. Like everything that you sort of criticized the show for, you get to see happen and play out the way that you want to. So this is highly focused, all takes place in King's Landing, and it is definitely like probably the best episode of the early seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a reason why, even though this would easily be one-upped just from a technical scale by later on episodes like The Watchers on the Wall, like Hardhome, like Battle of the Bastards, like The Spoils of War, and then obviously the 2 major action set piece episodes that we got in the last season. Like, there's a reason why this episode, it still rings itself up as like one of the best throughout the entire canon of the show. Just again, from a craft standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from a character standpoint, this episode is able to accomplish just so much and more. I think kind of first and foremost, the thing that I appreciate the most about this episode is for the fact that this is the first episode of the entire show right from the first episode, right? Because even the first episode takes place across, with 2 different storylines. You have the Winterfell storyline, and then you have the Pento storyline. But this is the first episode of the show that takes place entirely in one location, which the show had not done up until this point. And the fact that you're still checking in with like all of these different characters, all of these different settings, there's so much going on to building up to just this one battle. It kind of it pulls again a lot of the best from like kind of the old school Hollywood way of filmmaking as far as battles go. Obviously, there's a lot of influences from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. Those movies have been credited for pretty much all of the major battle sequences with the exception of a few. But this one, it's like you can tell, like Long Night has been compared to Helm's Deep, I think kind of unfavorably, because I think a big reason why the Long Night doesn't work is because it does a lot of things that Helm's Deep doesn't do. But I think this is a much better comparison to Helm's Deep, just as far as like the setup, how it's executed from minute 1 to minute 0, from minute 1 to minute 54, however long this episode lasts. Like, it's really, really impressive, from just all around standpoint. So, you want to get into this?
Yeah, let's do it. Totally.
It's
hey, listen, it's everyone's embedded in King's Landing. You got Tyrion trying to save the day. Everybody's sort of relying on him. And yet it's a tall order. Like, Stannis is coming, and he's probably going to win the day at the beginning of this episode.
Absolutely. I'm almost waiting for like Bruce Banner to drop into the scene and wake up and be, it's funny because there was even a one name drop in the episode where I'm like, wait, did they just fuck up and say Thanos instead of Stannis? But like, I rewinded and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So they didn't do it, but like, I was almost waiting for Bruce Banner to like crash out and be like, Stannis is coming, or like the one runner to come in and be like, Stannis is coming, but like they never had that. So I was like, all right, good. So opening scene. So you open up. The ships are arriving in the Blackwater Bay. You have Davos talking to his son, Mathos. They're actually having like a really interesting conversation here where a couple things that I wanted to point out before we, got into the character moments is I love how, just again, with the cinematography, just with the adherence, it's one of the stuff that, again, like early Game of Thrones was really, really fucking good at, which is just, again, taking all the little, like, action set, like, all the extras, all of the different, like, set pieces, and just kind of cluing you in, like, just, again, like, just into the residual humanity of them, where so much of the time, right, and again, this is another piece that I feel like they pulled from Helm's Deep, where the soldiers, they look miserable. They look scared. They look exhausted. Who knows how long they've been stuck on these goddamn ships. You see the one soldier just vomiting into the pot. It's like, it really is, I feel like, reminiscent of like what soldiers would have had to go through back in the day when they were prepping for these battles. They didn't know how long it was going to take there. Obviously, not every person was as well informed as the other. They kind of had to rely on word of mouth. There wasn't just that instant text chain. It's like, it's really, really well done, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dom. Like, I know I'm skipping ahead, but after the explosions go off, there's a moment where a random soldier speaks to Stannis and says, hey, if we land and we attack the beach, hundreds will die. And Stannis just nonchalantly says, no, it's thousands.
Yeah.
It's like many more are going to die, and we're still going to do this because we still have the advantage. And I think that sort of very realistic, like, war is a matter of like, hey, all our men might die, but at least we'll take the city. It's a reality in which this show sort of brings to the forefront that I think really works in this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, Eric is already chipping in, and Eric is actually bringing up some really interesting points. So Eric actually said that after this episode of Watchers on the Wall, we didn't get an episode that was set entirely in one location until Long Night and the Bells in the last season. I was just remembered. I'm like, holy shit, he's right, because even Hardhome and Battle of the Bastards had other storylines happening in them. And he also says, I don't think Thanos was quite in the pop culture zeitgeist. Hey, he was at the end of the first Avengers, which was around the same time that this episode aired. So, hey, I don't think I'm too far off there, Eric. But then we obviously zoom in on Davos and Mathos. They're just having some like pre-battle discussions. Right there, they're discussing their past. Like Mathos is saying, it's like, hey, you're home in King's Landing. That's where Davos used to say, and he said, never thought I'd be leading a fleet into the battle. And what's it called? Of course, up until the end, Davos is still teaching his son lessons, right? Because Mathos is saying like, oh, hey, the Bells, they're gonna see us as the rightful heirs, and he's like, Davos has to like kind of clue him into like the realities of war. It's like, look, these are just people here, to them, this is people who are just trying to go about their day. To them, we are nothing more than conquerors. We are conquerors until we take over, and then we are the new rulers. That's all it is. It's kind of like, I think this really, again, just these simple ways of expressing just the differences between the social classes as far as what is important versus what really isn't, which is as far as that, like, kind of the thing about like ordinary people in the mindset is they kind of they don't really have any aversions or like major, let's say, opposition to like rulers until they really are in place. People have asked, how have people allowed for tyrants to come into power so easily in history? And this is the reason why, because again, they don't realize it until it's too late. And I think that this conversation is like a really interesting way of kind of like of making us aware of that. And then you cut to King's Landing where you see Tyrion in bed with Shay. Tyrion, they're talking about it. Tyrion is obviously like, he hasn't slept at all. Like, he's exhausted. He's been awake all night. He knows that this is coming. He's like, all right, but we prep for this as much as we can. But it's kind of like, how that, like, that last minute when you're like getting ready for a test. I know that you're kind of like on the opposite end of the spectrum now as a teacher, but like back in the day when you were getting ready for your test and you'd studied your ass off and you'd prepped as hard as you could for it, but you were still waiting because there was that one extra question that was going to be on there that you hadn't prepped for, and like you're kind of like keeping yourself up at night. He's kind of feeling that right now as far as that goes, and he does another bit of eerie foreshadowing. There's a lot of that happens in this episode, where he says, obviously, if Stannis takes the city, then he's going to burn every Lannister that he gets his hands on alive, And I'm like, so question for you here about this moment. Eerie foreshadowing concerning, building up to the bells, especially considering that even though it's not Stannis, that is kind of exactly what ends up happening to King's Landing in the end.
Well, I think the whole show is focused around like King's Landing being burned. So
Clearly.
You're talking about the past tense, the dragons and how they destroyed, Harrenhal, for instance. It's one of those things where like burning down a city is part of this world, and therefore having Stannis do it, or later on, where it's going to be the dragons come back and they actually do it in that Bells episode. I think it's one of those things that is simmering the whole entire series.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, again, because the books weren't finished by this point, so they adapted it obviously up to a certain point, but obviously, once we got past like season 5, that's when things like really started to like coalesce, and really, Game of Thrones almost took on this new life, this new identity of its own. So, but I do find it interesting where obviously Benioff and Weiss with those later seasons are still paying homage to some of these earlier seasons, so they are still pulling essentially from the book. So even though it's not technically what Martin envisioned, it's still like kind of this really interesting what if scenario. We're going to talk a lot about kind of the what if and what is going to happen in Martin's final 2 books if and when he ever releases them, as far as how they differentiate from the last couple seasons, what they do end up including from the last couple seasons, because we know obviously that Martin still contributed a fair decent amount of story stuff for Benioff and Weiss to adapt for those last 3 seasons that were past the books. But so we move on, and the in the second to last setup scene, we have Pycelle bringing Essence of Nightshade, which is a very powerful and fast-acting poison, to Cersei, although she doesn't explain why. I think that Cersei's whole storyline is probably like the most underrated aspect of this entire episode. A lot of people talk about the battle, but the stuff with Cersei is absolutely magnificent, I think. And it finally ends, of course, with Bronn and the Lannister soldiers. I think they're singing the Reigns of Castamere. I'm not sure. But then Bronn is talking to a prostitute about the number of times that he's broken his nose. Then the Hound arrives. And I wanted to talk to you about this scene real quick. So obviously the Hound, he's our focus character for this episode, but he's got a pretty significant storyline in this episode. But like, I don't know, why do you think he's looking to pick a fight with Bronn here?
Well, I think basically both are like-minded. So Bronn's in the sort of tavern already drinking. He's having fun. He's relaxing. He's not really too concerned about the war. I guess he assumes he's going to survive it. And then the Hound comes in to have a drink and really, I would imagine, like calm his nerves before the whole fight takes place. And that's when he sees Bronn, and he sees Bronn being very flippant. And it's one of those things, I think, when you have 2 hired knights, obviously Bronn's a sellsword for Tyrion. The Hound is basically pledged to the Lannisters. But mainly the 2 of them are killers, and the Hound thinks he's better at it. The Hound actually thinks he's more noble. Bronn is just basically doing this for money. And so I think the tension here in this particular scene is the distinction between them. Is there honor amongst killers? And I think the Hound thinks there is, and part of the tension is the Hound thinks that Bronn should probably be stomped out.
Yeah, it's always interesting, kind of the Hound's twisted sense of justice, and it kind of, again, it wraps up with his final moment with Sansa in this episode, where again he views himself as this this bastard, this killer, but in a weird way he still has his own sense of noble justice. So again, it is kind of ironic the fact that again he even admits to Bronn that it's like, okay, we are both hired killers, but I know why I kill. You just kill for money, so it's like there is kind of a difference between the two. And the two stand up they are about to come to live. It really is disappointing because we really don't get a moment like this ever again throughout the course of the show, because the Hound obviously goes off and does his thing, and Bronn obviously stays and has his adventures in King's Landing. But it really sucks. I'm not gonna lie, a Hound versus Bronn fight, I would be interested to see what the odds are, because I feel like in every sense, the Hound has got all the advantages as far as like the brute strength goes. Like nobody can best the Hound in brute strength except for his brother. But Bronn, again, he's got the sellsword's edge. There's a reason why he survived pretty much every fight he's been in. He's quick, he's sharp. He analyzes his opponent's maneuvers. He doesn't have any excess things in order to weigh him down. He's all about finding the weak spots on someone. So it's definitely kind of like a little bit of a David and Goliath situation, but it is something that I would be interested to see, because I don't necessarily know if there's one obvious winner here. But
yeah, I think the episode does a really good job at this, because we see Bronn, once the fighting actually begins, we see him sort of take on like 2 or 3 sort of Stannis's men, and he's able to sort of, kill them really quickly. Striking multiple blows, and I think he slits the throat of the final one. So they're giving the characterization of what type of fighter he is. And then when they show the Hound in the midst of the battle, he literally chops someone in half.
Yeah.
Which is one of the most ridiculous shots I've ever seen.
Oh, it's so dumb, but I love it.
Yeah, but the Hound has that strength where on human strength to really just like destroy someone by cutting them in half. And I think that's the nuances that they do in this show, Game of Thrones, that they're able to go to those character details and show some of those nuances. And I think, having this scene in the tavern where you're sort of setting up the two at odds, and then sort of the fighting breaks out, it really gives you reason to pay attention to what they do during the battle, because, you have that on your mind that these two are warriors, and they wanted to fight each other, but at the same time, now the battle's come to them, and what can they do? And
Absolutely.
I think those shots and the scenes that they're involved in are really elevated by this tavern scene.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so well done. Again, like I can't overstate this enough, which is that even though this is a primarily action set piece based episode, the storytelling within all of the characters that we're following throughout this episode is some of the best that the show has to offer. Just again, from a subliminal standpoint, how we get really into the heads and really understand all of these characters throughout the course of this season that we've come to know over the last 2 seasons in ways that like we really didn't before. So we have one more scene before we head into the battle, obviously, where Tyrion is getting armored up by Podrick Payne, and he's having one last conversation with Varys. And Varys, again, it's a little bit of subtle hinting as far as like what Varys is going to really clue Tyrion into next season, which is that Varys tells Tyrion kind of, why he is so opposed to having Stannis of all the kings on the throne, due to, due to the fact that Stannis now worships the Red God, and the idea of someone burning people mercilessly, against their will, and also somebody that worships sorcery. He absolutely abhors it. It's kind of cluing him into, his own hatred and mistrust of magic. Then he does a little bit of a subtle hinting as far as like, how he's been cut. Again, I do find it absolutely hilarious that, again, so Varys is so against Stannis, becoming leader because he doesn't want Stannis to burn everyone alive, and because of Stannis believing in the Red God, but then still goes to work for Daenerys, and the same thing happens. It's like, I get it. He starts to like work against her once he finds out that she's going a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but it's like, still, like, come on. Like, Varys, it really sucks because Varys' motivations are so clearly outlined, and they do such a good job of, like, again, never making you know where his loyalties lie until they clue you in on like these little subliminal character moments. And it just sucks because, again, I really think of all the characters that are done dirty by the last 2 seasons, Varys is probably like one of the worst examples, because, oh man, it just makes no sense as far as that goes. And then we get another great scene.
Well, I think, for Varys, it's everything set up for him to go support Daenerys, and that's the person, and it seems like he chose the right, person. But, in the end, for him, no matter all his little whispers and scheming and all that type of stuff, like, he is basically flawed in some way. Like, he chose the wrong leader in essence. And, I don't think it's really, at the end of the day, they basically figure it out and solve the problem. But more or less, like, Varys truly goes with what he believes. And then he's wrong.
Yeah.
by the end of this series.
Yeah, it's so disappointing. Again, I don't really know if Martin had intended for something like this to happen to Varys, because Varys was always a character that always seemed to be on the right side of things. Every single time it seemed like there was going to be like a coming conflict, Varys always seemed to be on the right side of things. So it would make sense for his character arc to resolve in something where, okay, wow, so of course his end comes from when he finally makes the choice where he thinks he's going to be on the right side, and then it comes back to bite him. It's just execution. Execution was just done so poorly. So we get one more awesome scene before we really get into the midst of the fighting, in the midst of the main storyline, where everyone's kind of moving to where they're going in the throne room. Everyone's going off to their one location. Tyrion's giving these one set of instructions to Bronn. They have this one hilarious interaction before they go, where it's like, please don't die. And it's like, oh, we're friends now. And he's like, of course we're friends. Just because I pay you doesn't mean that we're not, doesn't mean that it affects our friendship. And he's like, it enhances it, really. It's like, I love the back and forth between these two. It's hilarious, ultimately. And then, of course, we have one more scene with Sansa and Joffrey before ultimately kind of, their ultimate parting of the ways in the next episode, finally, where Joffrey forces Sansa to kiss his sword. Heart Eater is the one that he names this one. This is his second of 3 swords that he would have. But I also wanted to point out, because there's also a lot of awesome stuff going on with Sansa in this episode as well. Obviously, Tyrion, Cersei, the Hound, Bronn, they're like our focus characters, not so much Davos and Stannis. But also there's a lot going on subliminally with Sansa in this episode too, where Sansa kind of, she's talking to Joffrey. She's asking him, will you lead the Vanguard? And then he's like, he's like, no, what kind of a stupid question is that? And then she's like, oh, of course, my lord. My traitor brother Rob, he always leads the Vanguard. Trying to bait him by playing to his ego, by trying to be like, okay.
I think Sansa basically is starting to play the game a little bit. Like, she knows she's trapped. She knows she's a prisoner against her will, but for the most part, she is able to outwit him verbally. And I think she's able to take advantage of that really for the first time here in this episode. And she gets away with it.
Absolutely.
For the most part, Joffrey is not going to necessarily attack her in these scenes, and he's too busy worried about the war. But Sansa's able to get her dig in, and just basically make it clear that Joffrey is not really that great of a king.
Well, it's more than that. It's the sense of, like, she is smarter than him. At the end of the day, even though, she still doesn't have that much experience relative in as far as leading, she is smarter than him at the end of the day. And because he is ultimately somebody who, because they think about it this way, right? Sansa and Joffrey, right? They're obviously 2 separate perspectives, right? But one was prepped for their role kind of in the future, right? Sansa was prepped from minute 1 that she was going to marry this High Lord and be his lady and all that. And then obviously her arc comes from, just the vast ripping away of the whole, that whole concept of high lords and ladies and noblemen and all that once she learns what people really are. But Joffrey has been very, very ill prepared for his role as king, because Cersei's entire priority as a mother was never to prepare her children for their rightful roles, but always to keep them safe, because Cersei's mistake was always relying on the fact that kind of their inherent power would keep her children safe. And I think part of a big reason for her kind of destabilization in this episode is the fact that this is kind of her rude awakening to the fact that no, nothing can keep her children safe, because at the end of the day, Joffrey is king, and he has to make an example by leading the troops. Ultimately, no one will acknowledge him as king. It's not even a matter of like his birthright is up for dispute. Like his right as a king, just based on like the fact that it is his role to defend and protect his people, is up for debate right now. And this is the moment ultimately. And it's a very precarious situation that she finds herself in, ultimately kind of the thing that the position of power that is so protected her family versus the things that they need to do in order to maintain that power, in order to maintain their protection. So then Cersei, Sansa, Shay, and Tommen, they're all up in their one room hiding with all the high noble ladies. And it begins again, a series of dialogue interactions that are some of the best. Again, we talk about like with just certain dialogue scenes between certain characters, they are just the writers. And again, this is Martin writing this episode. So like these are his characters, his baby, and the dialogue is just on point. Where Cersei is drunk out of her mind. She's pissed off. She's miserable. She's claustrophobic. She's angry. She's bitchy.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that she's suicidal, because she assumes that, she
immediately
Stannis
is
going to win. Yeah,
she's Stannis is going to win. We have Tyrion and Joffrey to lead us. We're fucked. Yeah, at least in her mind.
I guess that's fair enough. Mainly, she is thinking that Stannis is going to take the castle. All the women are going to be, sexually assaulted.
Right?
By
Yeah.
the men,
She even says it. She even says it's like, wow, all of these women are in for a good rape. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, she's very on the nose, and she's talking to Sansa,
yes,
but loud enough so everyone in the chamber can hear, which is great. You want to be locked
it's so
in
good.
With suicidal Cersei.
Yeah, right. Suicidal Cersei. That should be a thing that we put in like a prom. That'll come up later on when we hit the bells later on. Suicidal Cersei.
Yeah. So the main thing is she's drinking the wine. She's telling Sansa, "You better drink the wine because you're not going to like the end of this evening either."
Right.
Because you're young, you're the perfect target, so to speak. And she also says, you better use your womanhood to convince Stannis to keep you safe. More or less that's what she's talking about is, basically trying to use her position as a Stark and the fact that she's, a young, attractive woman to, make sure that one of the lords sort of protects her in some sort of way from the gruesome, possibilities that any random soldier will, take part of.
It's an interesting sequence because even though it's kind of just Cersei venting and kind of venting out her frustrations on the fact that like she is suicidal and she is not at all confident on the outcome of this battle, and it's interesting because I would say that probably like, Sansa talks a lot in the later seasons about how much she did learn from Cersei, even though she absolutely despises her and abhors her, but Sansa does learn a lot from Cersei in this scene. Like Cersei does, in all of her haste, kind of, again, it just proves that Cersei is not nearly, playing off the point from the previous episode about Cersei not being nearly as smart as she thinks she is. Cersei gives Sansa a lot of like really decent advice as far as that goes, as far as like how to use your womanhood, because again, like there was not a lot of, positions where women could actually like be able to like act independently and get what they want. So like they had to do what they had to do in order to survive, And
but Cersei basically has that whole line about like, I wish I was born a man, etc.
Right.
It's one of those things where the gender roles, in this particular world are laid out in this scene, and it's not really that great for them. And it's sort of like the message from Cersei to Sansa is do what you can. And, unfortunately, that's like the hard reality of this sort of world in which they're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the last bit before we move on to the actual battle, which is where they see that Ilyn Payne, obviously, famously Ned Stark's executioner, is standing guard there. And Sansa asks why he's there. Cersei says, to protect us, And she's like, and then obviously, when one of the Kingsguard members comes in later on and says that they've caught some thieves, somebody trying to like steal some stuff. She's like, our first traitors of the night, go on and hang them and use them as an example. Then she says to Sansa, it's like, what's it called? If you let even the slightest of of atrocities go, then it'll come back to bite you later on. So it's like, so best to start learning. And she's like, and she's kind of asked, how are they traitors? It's very, very interesting stuff. It's amazingly well written. But so now we get into, again, like this is one of the most, again, just across the history of battles in media, this is probably one of the most ingenious maneuvers ever, where you talk about setup and payoff, all the little seeds that have been building with Tyrion. And again, from the minute he arrived in King's Landing at the beginning of this season up until now, as far as with defending King's Landing, defending their home, they get up to the ramparts, they start to see the ships. Joffrey's like, where is our fleet? And Tyrion's like, oh, don't worry about it, they'll be here. And of course, they have that little barb where Joffrey tries to assert himself. There's a bunch of clever little wordplay with Tyrion trying barbs with Lancel and the Hound. And then he's like, I can order the Hound to chop your head off at any moment. He's like, well, then I would be a quarter of a man. And it doesn't have nearly the same ring to it. Like, again, just the one-liners. It's good to know that even under pressure, Tyrion is not at all lost when it comes to comedic material. Because again, I'm not kidding when I say this episode is the other half of Peter Dinklage's Emmy reel for me. Because again, just the acting here is absolutely spectacular. So we see the one solo ship sailing into the bay. It confuses both sides because Joffrey thinks that it's one of Stannis' ships. Davos sees the ship coming towards them and is like, what the hell? Why is only one ship coming towards them? They're like, okay, be careful. It gets up close and personal. Davos sees the wildfire spilling out from the ship, realizes too late that it's a trap, tries to warn the rest of the fleet. It's too late. Tyrion throws out the alert, the signal to Bronn. Bronn yeets the arrow up. Again, perfect aim on Bronn's part. Like, perfect aim. Like, again, not to be undone, like, it's almost kind of embarrassing how in the next season when we're introduced to Edmure Tully and he tries to fucking do the thing where he's shooting the arrow to his father's, funeral pyre, and he misses like 3 times before his uncle has to do it. It's like, man, talk about a high bar to overcome, because fucking Bronn nails that shit with one go, lights the entire fleet aflame, blows up the whole ship, kills Davos' son Mathos. Davos is knocked off the ship, at least for the time being, until it's revealed next season. We don't know if he's still alive, if he survived this at all. It's a visual spectacle, to say the least. And probably like the biggest use of their limited visual effects budget that they had at the time up to date, because, oh man, it is impressive, to say the least.
I would say that the effects here are magnificent. It's just all these ships going aflame, people dying. Like, it really gives you that sense that you're there on the battlefield, and that something devastating has happened to Stannis' army. That, everything was like Stannis was going to come in, he was going to take King's Landing, no fuss, no muss. It was his for the taking, and now you have the wildfire go off, and it's all game. For the rest of the episode, it's like...
Game on.
Who's actually going to win? Because, Tyrion and King's Landing and the Lannisters, had this great maneuver, but Stannis' immediate response is, oh, hey.
That's all they had.
Yeah, the imp has played his trick. Let's land.
I love Stannis automatically knows. I love Stannis automatically knows that this is Tyrion. He's like, oh yeah, there's no way that any other one of them were smart enough to be able to pull off something like that. This is easily Tyrion. Like, I don't know. It's like, is Tyrion's intelligence kind of really that well known and that well spread, or do you think this is just like an educated guess on Stannis' part?
I would have to imagine that you have a network of spies for Varys. That the networks of spies exist for everybody, and for the most part, I would say Stannis would be able to know that, Tyrion is really in charge.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of beyond obvious at this point. Again, it just makes it suck even more how in the later seasons, obviously, when Tywin comes to King's Landing, and it just Tyrion's actual effort in the protection of the city is just so downplayed, and to the point where even Tyrion himself is like, "What the fuck, man? I saved all your guys' lives, and this is the treatment and the response I get. Wow, fuck all y'all. I absolutely am gonna betray all you and go help Daenerys out." But the battle begins, and oh man, it is game fucking on. Stannis is like, okay, we're still marching for the city, and the soldiers like, look, all of that was like our entire fleet, and he's like, hundreds of people are gonna die in the march of the city, and Stannis is like thousands. Again, it's another example of Stannis's ultimate fatal flaw, which is just his unwilling relentlessness when it comes to compromise. Like, Stannis will not compromise. Again, it's the same thing that gets him killed 3 seasons from now when he marches on the Bolton's army, with a half-starved army, heavily outnumbered, and he will not back down on anything. So, but at least he's got a slightly more advantage here. He rose for King's Landing.
This is the first of Stannis' major blunders because, the Red Woman, Melisandre, basically says, like, hey, you can take King's Landing. The Lord of Light has given you the A-OK. And it doesn't work. And we see this again and again. Like, anytime that there's a major thing that Stannis is going for, that the Lord of Light gave him the A-OK.
It just doesn't work really in his favor. He is not Azor Ahai, the what's it called, the one born of salt and smoke. That is not Stannis. I think it's beyond obvious here.
So I think he was part of the Lord of Light's plan, but the plan was to really manipulate his ambition and allow for other players to really come in strong with their claim to the Iron Throne.
Yes, absolutely. So they're laying waste to the walls. They're lining up outside the walls. They get ladders going up. They're what's it called? They're ramming the gate. Again, Stannis is a seasoned battle commander. He knows what he is doing. And, he knows how to lay siege. He knows all the weak points.
What is it like? Tyrion's like, Clegane, the Hound, get a welcoming party, and they actually goes out with a bunch of men.
Yeah, including Lancel Lannister, which again, I'm sorry, I know that the Hound is trying to make a point, but like, why of all people is he getting useless fucking Lancel Lannister?
Well, hey, this is a really big thing because they go out there, they are brutally fighting, they're actually doing a pretty good job. The Hound even says, like, at some point when he comes back into the gates, this is after the fire sort of like, gives him an anxiety attack, and he turns around and he just goes right back into the keep. Basically, the Hound, is what is it? He's a ferocious warrior that is leading the way, and it's, even though it's devastating, he basically just
gives up.
Out.
He gives up. He's straight up has a panic attack.
Yeah, he sees the writing on the wall.
Yeah. Before we get into more of that, I just had a couple things. So obviously, of course, Lancel proves immediately to be useless. He gets in like one good look and then gets shot in the chest with an arrow and he immediately retreats. It's like, okay, yeah, so this character is definitely going to go far.
This is where the seed is planted for Lancel in the later seasons when he finds the faith, right?
Yes.
Because he gets injured in this battle. He gets basically talked down to by Cersei. And this whole experience, for him is a negative one. And it's basically just like destroys his viewpoint of the Lannister family.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I wanted to give out 2 one-liners that the Hound gives off again. Like, I think this is the beginning of like the Hound getting off some incredible one-liners. The Hound was not a character that was known for some of his amazing one-liners, but I think this was the episode where the writers were like, okay, every chance we get, we're gonna throw the Hound a one-liner or two. Where he first, before he goes outside, he turns to the leader of the archers and he's like, if any of those flaming fucking arrows come near me, I'll strangle you with your own guts or something like that. And then when they get outside again, this is again just a one-liner for the ages. And pardon my French, because that is so fucking good. There's no way I can mince words here. Where as they walk outside, his exact words are, if any man dies with a clean sword, I'll rape his fucking corpse. And I'm just like, wow. Like,
yeah,
goddamn.
That's a crazy motivational speech, I guess.
To say the
it's
least.
that's possibly the reality of war. It's
possibly
that you're marching into a certain death, and so you're I don't know, you're just sort of throwing that out there. You're like basically saying, like, if you don't go out there and give it your all and kill some of these men, I'll kill you myself.
Which is ironic, considering the fact that that's exactly what the Hound does, because the Hound is out there, he gets a few good licks in. Like you said, he literally chops a guy in half. Fucking, he sees how the Bronn slicing and dicing. Bronn shoots an arrow and actually saves him for a quick second, and then he freezes. If he freezes when he sees the fire, and he immediately retreats inside. Tyrion even asked him, he's like, he's like, fuck the water, bring me wine. Tyrion's like, oh, you want a bowl of cherries and maybe some whipped cream to go with that or something like that? He's like, we need you to lead our forces. You know the situation is bad when Joffrey and Tyrion are actually agreeing on something, where they're both trying to get the Hound to go outside and fight. Things are fucked then. And the Hound famously utters his lines, fuck the war, fuck the fire, fuck the king. Like, he is done. Like, fire is the one thing that is, like, that's the one thing that he cannot do. And he retreats, ultimately. He puts his tail between his legs, and he retreats. And then Joffrey, slowly afterwards, is brought away from the battle by Lancel. Lancel goes consult with Cersei. Cersei is like, I don't really care what you want. What's it called? Go get my son and bring him back inside. She then leaves the encampment. She's had it. She's like, fuck it. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die out in the open. I'm not going to die cooped up in here with everyone else. Sansa tries to calm everyone down. And then Shay actually tells Sansa to get to her quarters and actually says something really smart where she's like, hey, get to your quarters. Stannis is not going to kill you. Referring to Ilyn Payne. Ilyn Payne will, because at the very least, I don't know if Shay's related to the fact that, like, Sansa can, like, use her womanly nature to, like, work on Stannis, or maybe the fact that, like, because she is a Stark in King's Landing and Stannis, again, we don't really know, but if Stannis really has any affection for the Starks, but obviously, Ned Stark was a supporter of his claim, so, maybe he will give Sansa some mercy. Either way, Shay knows that from Sansa's perspective, she will be better off with in her room than with Stannis' forces, and the whole thing that happens afterwards is something really interesting, where you have Sansa going into her room, and you have kind of the last time that her and the Hound will see each other for a bit, where the Hound and Sansa, again, it's kind of the payoff to that scene that they had a couple episodes ago, where the Hound saved her from all the her would-be rapists, and then when he confronted her about men loving killing and all that, and they have this like kind of this final encounter where he's in her room. And she volunteers to bring her home. He says he's leaving the city. He's going to go anywhere without the fire. And he volunteers to bring her home. And she refuses. She says no for the first time. In the books, the way that it was played up is that it's played up as like, okay, she doesn't know whether this is a trick or not. But in this instance, I don't know. What do you think his motivations are for in this instance?
I think in this sequence, Sansa, first of all, when Cersei decides to leave and everyone's freaking out, Sansa's basically, let's sing a hymn. Like after Cersei,
I guess guess like as far as like Westerosi like soothing techniques, it's probably like one of the only ones.
Yeah, but after Cersei poisons the pool and says you're all gonna have bastard children in the next 6 months,
pretty loudly too.
Signs.
Like
it's like a him might not do it. I don't know.
Maybe not.
You tell me. It's maybe everyone's trying to just like calm down, escape, hope for the best. Sansa is showing some leadership here by leading that hymn and saying, no, Joffrey is fighting. Joffrey is doing a great job. It's clear that she's lying to them, but Sansa is showing some sort of leadership. And, Shay ushers her away, go to the room. And before she realizes the Hound is there, she looks toward the doll that Ned Stark gave her in the first season and sort of, comes to this realization of like, this was like, this doll was the last potential chance I had of having a childhood, and I sort of rejected it. And it's a sentimental thing for her, and she seems to be like packing it, ready to go. And then the Hound does that offer of like, hey, I'm going north, you want to come with me? And I think it's what Shay said, that Stannis, because Stannis is an ally of Ned, I think that's what makes her stay. She's like, oh, Stannis won't hurt me. Stannis will actually be sort of a protector. And, I think, maybe in the book it's a little more clear that it might be like a sort of a trick. But I think more or less, like, you can see it on Sansa's face that she doesn't really trust the Hound.
Yeah.
And she's going to put her trust in Stannis solely because of the fact that he is the rightful king.
Right, at least for now, ultimately, before he later goes on and dies. But so this is the last that we see of the Hound, at least for the time being, but he leaves her with one interesting message, but that kind of, I feel like, ties together everything that he's been trying to, let her in on throughout the season, which is that all men are killers, at the end of the day. Just remember that. If you take nothing else away from that, remember that. And then, of course, we go back to, again, probably one of Tyrion's most badass moments. Like I said, this is the back half of his Emmy reel where Joffrey leaves. The soldiers are slowly losing faith. They're slowly wondering what to do. And Tyrion, of course, rallies it together with one of the best speeches ever in history where he's like, they say that I'm half a man. Well, then what does that make all of you? I'm like straight up like they're William Wallace, what's his name? Aragorn from Lord of the Rings and Tyrion Lannister.
You're missing the part where he gets the courage, right? Because he's like, I'll lead the charge.
He's right, like he gotta have something. He muster himself up a bit. Yeah, you're right.
Like he's very like this week. I'll lead the charge. He's like, I'll lead the charge.
It's like he kind of have to build himself up. And then, of course, when the men are like, we can't go through the gate. Like, there's guys right there. And he's like, I know another way. Because right before Varys showed him a map of all the tunnels leading underneath the city, he's like, don't worry, I know a way. Worth. Yeah. Hey, whatever works, right? And then afterwards, he's like, don't fight for riches, don't fight for glory, don't fight for any of that because you won't get any of it. Fight because it's your home. It's your home. This is your city that Stannis is trying to take. Those are brave men knocking at our door. Let's go kill them. It's short, sweet, to the point, and it's one of the best speeches in the history of battle cinema. They go underneath the tunnels, they come out, and they ambush Stannis' forces. Stannis has managed to climb up under the wall. Stannis is getting into quite a few licks to himself. There's this one really cool shot where Stannis literally cuts off the top of a guy's head, and a couple of blood spurts coming out.
I hate to bring up other intellectual property, but that was some real Hannibal Lecter type
stuff.
Absolutely.
It was so awesome. It was so awesome. So Tyrion actually, again, does a pretty cool thing where he chops off one guy's leg. There's a lot of just like limbs being chopped off and like spurts of blood getting out. Like the special effects team really had a lot of fun with this episode where, the blood spurts out, then he chops the guy off. They managed to take out the soldiers that are trying to ram the gate. They seem to be doing pretty well at first. And then, everyone's cheering him on. And then he turns around and the fuck says it all as they see like fucking like 300 more men just charging at them. They try to hold them off. Everything seems lost. Tyrion is still fighting his heart out. He's saved by a Kingsguard member, Sir Mandon Moore. And all of a sudden, Sir Mandon Moore raises up his sword and slices at Tyrion's face down, giant scar right down Tyrion's face. How he managed to miss that, I don't know. I'm assuming that this guy is either like a really bad swordsman or the fact that like he's not used to trying to cut at someone this short. But either way, like this Kingsguard member tries to kill him. Sir Mandon Moore. In the books, the damage is a lot worse. It's like they almost made it like half his face was like carved off, but it's like I guess they like logistics wise they couldn't really do it. So I guess that they do a little bit of a scar that's a little bit of an homage to the late great Michael K. Williams, his scar on Omar from The Wire, rest in peace. But Tyrion is later saved by his loyal squire, Podrick Payne. Podrick's first major moment that shows that he's a character to be worth following throughout the rest of the show when he kills Sir Mandon by stabbing him in the back of the head with a spear. And then he cuddles Tyrion, kind of protects him. Cersei and Tommen are in the king's room, are in the throne room. Cersei is telling Tommen this story in order to try and like console him, coach him, make sure that it's like she's about to kill her kid. She's like, fuck it, like I am not letting us.
She's about to kill the kid and herself. This is the ultimate suicide pact that Tommen really, he is sort
early
of
Tommen
like,
before he becomes extra useless. Useless to extra useless.
He dodged a bullet because in the scene where, Cersei is basically being real with Sansa and all the women there, Tomlin can be seen in the background just passed out. He's like asleep during this rampage. And then it's like...
He was good. He doesn't know that his mom's literally about to kill him.
Yeah. So he's just totally unaware. And, obviously how this ends is... she's ready to commit suicide. Tyrion is, laying in Podrick's arms, like, can't really do anything. He's about to pass out, so we can do a nice little jump cut to later on, just like in the first season. And, and then basically a force comes in.
You want to talk about the first of many Deus Ex Machinas, but here it works because again, like it's a good fulfillment of the last episode where Tywin left from Harrenhal. He made it clear that you weren't sure whether he was going out to fight Robb's forces or whether he was going to back up King's Landing. And it looks like he made the smarter call because he ultimately not only his forces, not only did he make the smart call, but he also made the smart call in taking Littlefinger's advice because he rides up with the Tyrells backing them up. Obviously it's made a big thing. Obviously that Loras Tyrell is leading the Tyrell forces and is wearing Renly's armor, so everyone assumes that it's the ghost of Renly that's come to back up Tywin Lannister, in order to help rally the men to fight off Stannis. It's really interesting. They don't really harp on that in this episode, but this force comes out of nowhere. They manage to fight off the rest of the Baratheon forces. Stannis is forced to retreat. Not the first time that he's going to be forced to do that. And I love how he is so intent on continuing to fight that like his men literally have to drag him away. They're like, this battle is lost ultimately. And the ending shot, again, just a badass shot at the end where Tywin walks into the throne room right as Cersei is about to feed Tommen the poison. Loras comes in first, pulls off the hood. Cersei's kind of confused at first. She's like, what's going on? And then Tywin marches in. She drops the poison. And he's like, the battle is over. We have won. And
and I will say that it's an interesting character thing for Cersei is that she pours the poison out, breaks the bottle, almost like she's embarrassed that she was about to do that. That she didn't have faith in her father or like she was taking a coward's way out. It's not something that Tywin probably would have approved of. And, she tries to hide it. I don't think they will bring this up in any way in future episodes, but it's a very interesting character moment that's placed there where it's like, oh, I'm kind of embarrassed to be caught with this poison.
Yeah, definitely. Eric also brought up an interesting point. It's like, I can imagine that would have been an unnecessary pain to have to CGI off Peter Dinklage's nose for the rest of the series. I don't know. I feel like they had the money. I feel like they could have done it. Yeah, I think that I'm chalking that up more Benioff and Weiss's just laziness when it came to like, especially those later couple seasons.
But it also comes down to actors are known for their faces,
that too.
And you don't want to manipulate it too much if you don't have to.
Yeah, that's true. Especially also because like Tyrion in the books is a lot uglier than the Tyrion that we get in the show. Tyrion in the show is like, it's Peter Dinklage. He's a pretty good looking dude. All things considered. And Tyrion in the books is not at all that good looking. But so we have it. We have our first major battle sequence of the episode. Before we get out of here, I just wanted to talk real quick about like kind of how this compares to like certain of the penultimates going forward, where this would again set up the precedent of where it's almost like every other penultimate. It's like the penultimates would either be like this really plot-centric episode that would end with this gigantic twist, or it would be the action, the action set piece battle episodes, and then the last season they kind of did it with both, where so it's like for the first 6 seasons it was like all of the it's like the odd episodes. So it's like you had Baelor, which was major story functions until Ned Stark's death. Then you have this episode, which is a battle. Then you have Reigns of Castamere, which is major story functions that lead up to the Red Wedding. And then the 4th season is the Battle of the Wall. And then the 5th season where things start to change it up, because the 5th season, the primary penultimate episode, the big moment is the Dragon Pit episode. That's when it ends. So it's a little bit of both, where there is a lot of plot that goes on, but it ends with the Dragon Pit episode. And then the season 6 is you get 2 battles actually, because you get obviously the Battle of the Bastards, but then you also get the battle in Meereen as well, which again is a little bit. I definitely think that's another one where it's like, okay, yeah, we gotta rush ahead with this for time's sake. So as far as how this goes to the previous penultimate episode, Pat. So we've got 2 penultimate episodes now in the bag now. So if you had to pick between this and Baelor, which one would you go with?
Hey, this one, Blackwater, is so far the best episode of the series. From obviously season 2, episode 9, and before. I think everything that you want from developing the web of characters and building up to sort of a climactic moment, this really pays off for obviously the past 18 episodes worth of content.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
It really changes the dynamic for what's to come ahead, which is even better.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say that so far of the 19 episodes that we've seen so far, that this is your favorite?
Yeah, I would say that I really enjoy Blackwater, and hey, it's there's just so many good scenes where it's the Braun Hound scene, and their back and forth banter, Cersei and Sansa in that chamber. There's a lot of good there. Tyrion and Joffrey and Lancel all and the Hound on the battlefield, like all this sort of good dialogue, great scenes. It's the battle stuff is cool. It's great to see actually some fighting for the first time. But the fact is, it's paired with a lot of good writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it shows writing is key first and foremost. You want to have a good story, have some damn good characters, have them in some really high stakes, and get some good writers at the end of the day, because that is ultimately what makes great drama. It's what makes great television. So again, that's our second penultimate in the books, people. That was the Battle of Blackwater. More of a commentary than an episode recap, but I definitely think that it is one of the best episodes easily that the show has to offer. Only, surprisingly enough, with all the merciless amounts of death counts, we really only had 2 major character deaths. Obviously, the Kingsguard member Sir Mandon Moore that Podrick killed, and then Davos' son Mathos Seaworth that died at the beginning of the episode. And that is it, people. That was our penultimate episode. We've got 1 episode left of season 2 before we get into season 3. So let us know your thoughts on the Battle of Blackwater down below. Be sure to click the like button, click the subscribe button. Be sure to keep coming back to the channel for more content. Professor Pat, where can the good people find you?
Hey, you can listen to me on the Talkin TV sort of podcast and the YouTube channel. And, also, hey, I'll post something on Instagram, I swear, at Patrick W. Huber at some point in time.
At some point. You can, of course, find me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, but more importantly, follow the podcast channel at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, where I post every single day, twice a day. Content-wise, again, Chris and I have our Malignant and Card Counter review going up tomorrow for the podcast this week. For Halloween, first time watch, we've got Halloween, the Curse of Michael Myers, and I might have a variety show up this week. I might not, with me and AJ talking about a lot of stuff that happened in the world of movies. But until next time, people, we'll see you guys next week for the season 2 finale as the Battle of the Thrones continues. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. See you guys next time.
Make more wildfire, man.
Indeed. Make more wildfire.